Hi everyone and welcome back to OnCoffee, where we sit down with the minds reshaping healthcare over stories, reflection, and of course, a cup of coffee. I'm your host Vahe. Today's guest is Dr. Miet Vandemaele, a trainee radiation oncologist at the Department of Radiation Oncology at Gent University Hospital. Miet, it's such a pleasure to have you. Welcome to OnCoffee.
Hi, Vahe. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a big fan of the podcast and I'm a big fan of coffee, so I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you for the kind words. So let's start with our usual ritual. What is your ideal cup of coffee and when during the day do you enjoy it most?
I'm not so much a coffee fan as a coffee addict, if I'm completely honest. So I start my day with coffee. I continue my day with coffee throughout, and I drink even coffee in the evening, and I still manage to sleep. Prefer my coffee just like lungo, just a regular black coffee. You know, a good cappuccino or a latte macchiato, a nice espresso after a meal. I'm really down for everything.
Yeah, that's really great. I'm also a coffee addict myself. I'm starting my day with a strong cup of coffee and a second and third shot and even fourth shot in the evening. And also, I'm still managing to sleep. Actually, when I'm drinking coffee, I'm sleeping better than without coffee. I don't know what's happening in my...
I hope it stays like this. Everyone keeps warning me that, you know, past a certain age, I will not be able to do it anymore. Which is all the more reason I think to enjoy it now while it lasts, I'd say. So no, I managed to sleep, and honestly, it's just a habit, and it's just really a good reason to take a break and a good reason to keep working with a cup of coffee just by my side.
Yeah, let's hope it stays like it is for our whole life.
Yeah, let's touch wood, yeah.
So, Miet, you have spent years involved in student and resident representation from local education committee to national policy work. Could you please share about this experience?
Yeah, that was a great experience actually throughout. I started doing that kind of work as a medical student quite early on. And I think, every university will have it and every country has it, you know, your local student body and then your university student body or even your national representation or student unions, whatever they're called. And, you know, there's a group of people will always be there. You can reach out to them. They will solve, you know, very minor issues as in PowerPoints which are not available for your class, up until having discussions with the dean of your faculty of your university on really the curriculum issues that you have. That's how it started for me, you know, by being involved in my year's council. What's it called? And, you know, fixing those very day-to-day problems. And by doing that and moving on towards the more bigger problems, because if you kind of get dragged into it and then you realize maybe this is not just one professor who's being forgetful about those PowerPoints, but there's actually a structural issue behind it. You know, the platform that's not accessible to them or for us. And then you start talking to the people in charge on a higher level, and then you get to the level above that, and so on and so on. So it was a very, very nice experience because you get to work with a group of students like yourself. They're in your year or they're in the years, you know, they're a few older years than yourself. So you can learn from them and you can learn how to solve those issues. You can also learn, you know, very practical things for yourself. I mean, if you're a first years in medical school and you're reaching out to a third years or a fourth years, you know, they're just a few years ahead of you and they've been where you are right now. So you can reach out to them for advice for yourself, but also to solve the problems that you're dealing with on a wider level. So that was very, very interesting for me on a personal level, but it also teaches you a lot of about your curriculum and a lot about the bigger issues that we're all dealing with. And it's honestly very nice to try and solve something that, you know, that you benefit yourself from, but also that your colleagues will benefit from, and maybe even the people that will come after you. Because if you solve the problems, you know, if you solve something as easy as a PowerPoint, that's very, you know, very direct sort of response. But if you can improve your curriculum, or if you can improve the problems that you're dealing with as a medical students on national level, you may not benefit from that yourself, but it's very nice to see that the people who are coming after you will have that improvement in the curriculum and the organization of their education and the organization of their internships, things like that. So that was honestly for me a very nice experience, a very educational experience, and really I can recommend it to everyone who's seeing an issue in their curriculum and their education, maybe during your internship. If you see a problem, try and solve it for yourself, and maybe try and solve it for the people who are coming after you. It's so much more rewarding if you're able to do that.
That was such a great experience, and you are completely right. You have to raise awareness about the issues around you, otherwise they won't resolve on their own. I wanted to ask, how did that experience shape your view of medicine or your identity as a physician?
Oh gosh, it absolutely shaped my identity as a physician. In your medical curriculum, I think most of us are being taught about societal issues and how they impact the care that you can give to your patients as a physician, right? But mostly, if you work on a day-to-day basis, you're not really aware of it, or you don't always see the impact. But sometimes it is very visible. I mean, if you have a patient that's sitting in front of you and you cannot offer a certain treatment because it's not available yet in your country because of structural issues, or this patient, very practically has a very late stage cancer due to environmental exposure, toxicity, stuff like that, then you just realize how much broader issues that there are, and that you not can address by yourself sitting there at your desk, as a treating physician, but that require a more broad commitment. That's something you see that in your curriculum in sociology courses. You see it in the data, epidemiology. There are certain groups of patients who just present with other diseases, right? But seeing it and knowing it and learning about it is just the first step that you need to take to be able to do something about it. And by doing that on a small scale as a student representative in a student body, being aware of the problem that is existing, addressing the problem on a lower level, and then seeing that there are higher levels behind it, and seeing what you can do if you get together with other people who are also willing to do something about it, to invest their time in it, and then seeing that by doing small things and maybe by doing larger things and addressing the issues where they can be solved, even if it's in a very slow, frustratingly slow pace. That's actually something that's very valuable to have experienced, and that is something that I really think that we as physicians can do as well in our jobs. If you see issues that you cannot solve yourself for your patients, and maybe you can address them with groups of people or with other people together at the levels where they should be addressed and where they can be solved. And it's not just environmental issues. I mean, that's a very hot topic now, as it should be, climate change and how it impacts health and healthcare. And how some groups of people have it worse or will have a stronger impact because of healthcare or because of climate change. I think we should address that as physicians because we see it on a day-to-day basis, but we should get ourselves organized and we should address it at regional levels, national levels, policy levels, where the measures that can really impact the cause of those problems should be taken. So just having that sort of small-scale experience, I think, really is something that is an eye-opener. You can achieve a lot if you get organized and if you just find the people who are seeing the problem and are willing to address it as well. Get organized, try and reach out to the people who are in charge, get a seat at the table, bring some input at the table, create a solution if it is possible, which is not always easy. But if you think of what can we do, what can possibly be done, bring that to the table and then see how people react. And if they don't react, just send another email, do another phone call. There's always a way of trying to achieve a solution or working towards a solution. And not doing anything will never change anything. It will never get you nearer to a solution. So trying and maybe failing or not being heard, I think, is still better than not doing anything at all. So that really is something that I've taken with me in my clinical work, and I think also in my research. I'm now working not as a clinician. I'm still haven't finished my clinical training, but I'm working as a PhD researcher on health economics, health services research. So really more the policy issues. And I think that kind of energy, that kind of questions are really very much the core of my research. What are the problems? What are the problems with access to radiotherapy? What are the problems with access to innovations in radiotherapy, innovative healthcare? And how can we overcome those issues? And how can we address those issues by doing the right research, bringing those data, those conclusions to the people, the people in charge, the people that matter.
I want to talk about the part you said you have to always get to the table, you have to send emails. And I think the worst thing that can happen, you get rejected. But you can always try to make an impact that will really matter for others.
I just want to tap in maybe on what you said. I mean, you're right. The worst thing that can happen is you're being rejected. And that has happened. Just full disclosure, I think I've had more non-responses to my emails or to phone calls or, not being invited. That will happen in my research, in my work as a student representative, in my work as a researcher. People will maybe not reply. And I think it's important to realize, because we tend to see the success stories and to see what has happened and what we have achieved. But I think beyond every achievement, there's probably a lot of failure. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a lot of failure around, and it's not a bad thing to fail necessarily, but I think it's important to find a way to deal with that failure. And for me personally, that was, being part of a group, and failing together is always a bit easier on the mind, I think, than failing by yourself. And if you do fail, try and see if there's a lesson in there, and try to keep moving ahead. And that's very easy to say afterwards, the moment that you had a bad meeting, or that someone just rejects you, or I don't know, that your paper get rejected, or that your presentation is going badly, or that you've tried to raise an issue with the dean of your faculty and you get sort of told off or scolded. That has happened. That I think it's important to see, right, what have you learned? What have you achieved? What have you not achieved? And how can we, there's always a next step you can take. So I just maybe want to do that shout out to all my my fellow failures out in the world. I think everyone has failed at least a few times in their curriculum and during the training, and it's only afterwards that you realize that maybe that's the moments that you grow the most. So I'm to try to keep a positive spin on that.
Yeah. So if you're not failing, I think there's a problem with your way. So you're doing something wrong. So, yep, it's really natural that people get failed. And the most important part of that is how they rise after that fail and try to do more. So you also mentioned how much do you value collaboration, not just as a concept, but in daily life. How does that show up for you in your clinical or academic work?
Gosh, I think it's the core of, radiotherapy, radiation oncology collaboration. I think it's probably the core of most successful research, whatever your topic is as well. It's something that I personally really like about radiotherapy, that you get to work together with a lot of different profiles. Really, you have your clinical, your medical oncologist, your colleagues in radiotherapy, you have your physicists, you have your RTTs. Beyond that, there's the people supporting you in the administration and so on. You get to talk to surgeons and everyone at during the MDT. You get your patient, of course. And it's in those interactions, I think, that the specialty of radiotherapy really, really moves ahead. In clinical research, you see the most valuable clinical research is where everyone gets at the table together and looks at the problem not only from one perspective, but from all the multiple perspectives. And then speaking for my own research, if you look at what is beyond radiotherapy as a clinical specialty, you have the health services, the health economics, the access to radiotherapy, the epidemiology things that I already mentioned. You need a lot of brain power at the table to identify those problems and then for sure to overcome those problems. And that's maybe from a broader point of view, a broader perspective that I'm talking now, but very much on a day-to-day basis. For me, it's very valuable if you're doing your work to maybe just reach out to a colleague who's sitting next to you working on a similar topic or maybe something entirely different, and to just speak up and say, gosh, I'm working on this or that, and I've run into this problem. What do you think? And just that really day-to-day interaction can be surprisingly valuable and can just give you more and more insights, and maybe just some other perspective that you need, just that you can say, right, I hadn't considered to look at it from this point. So really that day-to-day interactions, I think, are very valuable. And, if you want to, whatever topic that you're addressing in your research, if you bring in other perspectives, it will always be, educational for yourself, but it will always bring your topic to a higher level. Maybe just as a very concrete example, I'm now working here. I'm working here. I'm currently in Spain. I'm not in Belgium. I'm working in Barcelona at the Institut Catalan de Oncología with a group on a project that looks into different types of reimbursements for different types of radiotherapy treatments. And the group that I'm working with, health economists, epidemiologists, people with like an industry economy background. I have my clinical background mostly. So it's really that interaction that brings the project, I think, to another level, because they are thinking of issues, of questions that I would never think of myself spontaneously. And I can bring in the clinical perspective, the day-to-day practice that they have not considered. And that interaction just brings on new questions, new ideas. It shapes the project that I'm working on. It provides new questions that need to be answered maybe in the future. So that collaboration is really something that I highly value and that I try to seek out actively in my day-to-day work. Just speaking out to colleagues is very much fun. Try not to do it just in your coffee breaks. If they're working, let them work, with concentration, but it can be, just in your day-to-day work. I try to seek out that interaction. And if I have an important question to be answered, I just know it's going to be so much easier and more interesting to answer if I get in more brain power from different perspectives. So that collaboration is really something that I think everyone needs to seek out in their work. Also in clinical work, there's the reason that we're doing MDTs, right? I bring in the radiation oncology perspective, the surgeon brings in other perspective, the RTT, the psychologist, everyone has their role into trying to provide the best possible care for patients. The more people that you have at the table, I think the more better that we can do as physicians, as caregivers for patients.
If you want to go fast, you work alone, and if you want to go far, you have to work in a group. So indeed, that's true.
Yeah, sometimes the cliches make sense, right?
Yeah. So Miet, you mentioned about a bit about your research, but I want to ask, what do you really do? I know you are working on high-value radiotherapy interventions and AI in radiotherapy. Could you please walk us through what that involves?
So no, the work that I'm doing is on a project which is called the Value-Based Radiation Oncology Project. And what we're trying to do is building a framework which will allow us to identify high-value radiotherapy. So that kind of interventions that really bring meaningful benefit to the patient. And by identifying those high-value interventions, hopefully, provide the evidence that we need to support their implementation in the clinical work, but also support their access to those high-value interventions through policy decision-making, supporting the policy decision-making with that evidence, and by policy decision-making, I mean, reimbursement, market access, stuff like that. In order to identify what is high value care. You kind of need to do, right, what is value, and you can determine value in different ways, but it usually comes down to looking at endpoints, outcomes that matter, looking at the cost, and value was determined a few years ago. It's actually a health economic concept specifically that looks at outcomes that matter most to the patient over the treatment, and then divided by the cost for that treatment. But for radiotherapy, you kind of need to look at, we have a lot of different interventions. How do you determine the value for, I don't know, for example, hyperfractionation? How do you determine the value of what surface guided radiotherapy or online adaptive? Maybe they need a different approach, those different types of interventions. So what we're doing in order to determine what is high value radiotherapy, we kind of took a step back, look at radiotherapy, try and determine different categories of radiotherapy intervention, and for each category, determine what endpoints do you need, what level of evidence do you need, in order to determine this is a high value intervention, this is an interesting intervention, but it doesn't bring that much meaningful benefit, and it comes at a much higher cost. So building that framework by really determining each of those crucial building blocks, so endpoints, level of evidence for different types of radiotherapy interventions. That is really the core of my PhD. But it links with a lot of different topics. So I mentioned the reimbursements. So that's very clear policy decision kind of question that is linked to the whole what is high value and how do we get high value to patients question. So that's kind of a side project, but it's very relevant to the work that I've been doing for the past few years.
If I'm not mistaken, in your PhD, you studied the using of non-traditional endpoints like organ preservation to capture radiotherapy benefits. Why are those endpoints important, and how can they be better integrated into your policy decisions?
That's a very good question. I think everyone who's working in radiotherapy will know, just imagine that you're sitting at an MDT and sometimes you have that debate, right? Should we treat this patient with radiotherapy, or do we do a systemic treatment first? Sometimes the evidence is not that clear. And then you usually have medical oncologist colleagues who can bring out a study that says, right, we looked at 5-year overall survival in this randomized control trial for this kind of immunotherapy. This is data and so on. If you look at radiotherapy, that's more difficult to generate that kind of evidence because usually a lot of times the advantage of radiotherapy is in higher accuracy. You're saving the organs at risk from unwanted dose. You get a better dose on your target organ, your target tumor. But in order to translate that kind of improved accuracy or better dose distribution into overall survival, there's a time lag. So it takes longer typically and it takes more patience in terms of in trial design to generate that kind of classic evidence for radiotherapy interventions. So the debate is more difficult, and you are at risk of getting a whole range of different endpoints without really structural appraisal. So comparing radiotherapy intervention 1 to radiotherapy intervention 2 is getting more and more difficult because some people will look at progression-free survival, others will look at organ preservation, local control endpoints. So you need to be aware of the endpoints that really are important to radiotherapy, and then you kind of need to have a sort of agreement, a more structural approach to evidence generation in radiotherapy. And that is part of the work that we've been trying to do. First, look at what is available in radiotherapy in terms of endpoints. What are we using now? It's very diverse. And then maybe what are the most appropriate endpoints for radiotherapy to really show their value, to really show their meaningful benefit. And if you ask the radiotherapy community about that, and that's exactly what we did, we asked radiation oncologists, we asked physicists, RTTs, people involved in radiotherapy care, what if you look at this kind of intervention, what are the endpoints that you think we need to really demonstrate meaningful benefits. And then you get a mix sort of traditional endpoints and non-traditional endpoints. And that is a mix, I think, if you look at systemic treatments that you'll see less frequently. But you need that kind of agreement in order to have a structural approach to appraisal. If you don't have a structural approach to appraisal, then your data will be all over the place. Because maybe in some countries or some regions or even some hospitals, they will say, well, we accept this kind of endpoints as being the best. And then, the hospital next to it will say, well, no, we accept another endpoint. We think this is the best. And if you can sort of streamline that appraisal, if you look at, if you can do it from an agreement, I think hopefully that should be able to improve access to high value care, but improve access everywhere and not just in your hospital, but make it a bit more, equitable across regions, across countries, across hospitals.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting and helpful. It's really different from medical oncology, as I can say. So AI is also involved in radiotherapy more than other fields of oncology, right? If I'm not mistaken. So how do you see the role of AI in radiation oncology in 5 or to 10 years?
Gosh, I think that's a great question. I'm not sure if I'd say that AI is more involved in radiotherapy than in other fields. I think AI is going to be everywhere. Maybe it's more visible in radiotherapy because we have a lot of automated processes. We have more calculation-based processes maybe in radiotherapy than in medical oncology. But I think there's no escaping AI, and nor should we. I think we need to be aware of the advantages that AI can give us and try and use them as best as possible, but also as safe as possible, because every innovation or every sort of new hot thing comes with their with potential risks, right? So I think that's an important thing, that we need to maybe train ourselves more in the use of AI and the appropriate use of AI. How do I see it in the next 5 or 10, maybe 20 years? I think it will be much more, used on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully it will be used to make our lives and that of our patients easier. And the things that we now spend a lot of time on, maybe just administration as one example, hopefully that can be made easier using AI, and not just in radiation oncology, but everywhere really. No one likes typing out letters or administration. I think we can save a lot of precious time there and spend that time on the patient. For radiotherapy, I really think there's an opportunity to help us actually, because we know the volume of patients that we have now will just increase over the next 5 and 10 years. We're looking at major increases in patients that we need to treat, and we are looking at the same time at a shortage in our workforce, in clinicians, RTTs, physicists. So we will need to be able to treat more patients with less resources, human resources, but probably other resources as well. If you look at what's happening in the world right now, it seems that healthcare is not everywhere priority one, to say it very carefully. So hopefully AI can help us automate those processes that can be automated, and help us to deal with the problems that are coming at us, and help us to actually safeguard access to care for patients who need it. And I think there's a lot of automation possibilities. And beyond that, I'm not a physicist. I'm not very well read into anything AI based. But I think I'm very much looking forward to what AI can bring us. I think we have not seen yet the full potential, and maybe the magic that AI can bring us. So I think it's mostly important that we try and learn as much as AI as possible and really embrace it in a good way, and not try and avoid it because we don't know it, because we don't know how to use it. I think we need it, and we can use it in the best way as possible.
Yeah, and just one example. When I was having my oncology rotation, I was mostly in the department of radiation oncology, and my teacher told me that back in several years ago, when there was no AI, they have to sit in front of computer and mark every single organ with a mouse, and it took so long, like 40 minutes or 1 hour. And now when we have AI is doing it by itself. And my teacher said that he has more time now to talk with patients, and he can admit more patients. And I think it's really wonderful. And how AI is going to change our everyday life is really interesting.
No, absolutely. And I think that's probably, and I know of some people probably still are a bit afraid of AI in the same way that people used to be afraid of, probably in the beginning that computers became a thing in clinical work and computer-based calculations. Everything new will bring its questions and its risks, but if we can use it in a good way and in a safe way and evaluate it, and if we can do that, I think really we can help ourselves to help our patients better. And I think that should be the aim of everything that you bring into the clinic, right? What does it bring for the patient? What does it bring for us? Every minute that you can spend additionally talking to a patient and addressing their concerns, I think that's probably something that AI, I don't know if it will ever be possible, but that will probably take the longest to have a really AI empathy based conversation. I think that will still require a trained human to have a meaningful conversation, at least for the next few years. Maybe in the far future that will change, but for that part, I think humans are still probably best suited.
So we have to just wait and see how things evolve, and that's the only thing we can do now. Okay, Miet. So let's go out from hospital for a moment. Outside the clinic, what brings you joy or helps you recharge?
Oh, so many things. First of all, I know it's good to have a good work-life balance, but I do want to, it is important to find joy in your work as well, right? That's something that we often forget. If you focus on work-life balance, then sometimes it's because you really don't like the work that you're doing, or you're just working in the wrong place or for the wrong reasons. So I honestly really enjoy my work, and sometimes, in the evenings I look up something. I do some additional reading, or I try and finish a project. But fortunately, I do have a life outside my work, which is important. And there's so many things that I enjoy. If I have some time, I like spending it with my friends, with my family. If it's just going out for a drink, and have a chat, have a coffee. It's very important. Every week, I have one grandmother left. She's end of her 80s now, and it's not an official thing, but every Sunday we just get together with family, whoever's, around and available to do that, just drops in at grandma's to have a coffee, and you bring some cake with you, or some pastry that you made yourself, or that you bought at the bakery, in my case mostly, and just chat up with everyone who's there. I think that's one of the things that I really, really look forward to every week, to do that. And if you can't make it, then Monday evening, I'll just call up my mom and ask her, so what's new in the family? How is everyone doing? That's something that I really enjoy. And I think most of my, or a lot of my social activities really, involve, good food and or having a drink. I think that's really a good basis to unwind and to get energy and to meet friends. Not saying that my friends are an excuse to go out for a good dinner. Sometimes it's the other way around, have a good dinner to meet up with your friends. But that's something that I can recommend, right? See friends, see family, and bring in some good food, and usually you're in for a good time.
Yeah, it's so refreshing to hear that. I think our audience really needs to remind themselves that it's okay to have joy and hobbies alongside ambition. Thank you for sharing about your hobbies and life outside of clinic. So our listeners include med students and early career doctors. Based on your journey so far, what advice would you give someone just entering the field?
That's a very good question. My advice would be to seek out people that you can learn from, and that can be in any way, right? That can be the people in your family, who are older and wiser. That can be the people in your workplace who have been there just for a few years or have been there for a long, long time. Not necessarily the clinicians, the doctors. That could be the people from administration as well. And ask questions. That for me was something, if you don't know the answer, someone else will, or they can point you in the right direction. And just, maybe in a few years, you'll be the person that people will come to ask their questions. There's always growth, and there's always people who can help you grow. Try to find them. And you're never alone, just ask around, and maybe it can feel lonely sometimes. Just ask around and you'll discover that maybe you're not so lonely as you thought you were.
Yeah, one of the best ways to learn something fast is to ask questions. Like children are asking all the time. So ask questions. That's really important. Miet, thank you for this rich and inspiring conversation. From building community to learning for the joy of it, you have shared so much. And thank you for that. And to everyone listening to us, thanks for joining us on another episode of OnCoffee. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep the coffee brewing. Thank you so much, Miet.
Thank you, Vai, for the invitation. I really had a great time, and I'm really looking forward to a next OnCoffee podcast as well.
Thank you so much.